Good morning and welcome to this webinar on mastering local housing market data using AEI Housing Center's new toolkits. One is called HEAT, which stands for Housing Economic Analysis Toolkit, and the other is called the GNI Homeless Displacement Toolkit. GNI stands for Good Neighbor Index, and the webinar will be presented in two parts. Part one will run from 10 a.m. to noon. We'll leave plenty of time for questions, or you can ask questions along the way using the Q&A question function for Zoom. We prefer that you use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature, for questions. So again, you should see on the bottom of your screen a Q&A, and you can enter your questions there, and we'll be monitoring those. These two toolkits, the HEAT toolkit has 20 tools in it, and we'll be going through those 20 tools one by one and showing them what they do and how you might use them. We're going to be using Los Angeles as the case study for using the toolkits, Los Angeles City. In some cases, most cases, the data will be at Los Angeles City level. In some cases, it'll be at the county level, and in a few cases, it will be at the metro area level. This afternoon, from 1 to 3 o'clock, we will have Major Ethan Frizzell of the Salvation Army. We'll be going through the Good Neighbor Index Homeless Displacement Toolkit from 1 to 3 p.m. And again, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers in the afternoon session. There'll be a break from noon to 1 p.m. These are all Eastern Standard Times. There'll be a break from noon to 1 p.m. With that, we'll get started. And this morning's webinar will be conducted by myself, Ed Pinto. I am the co-director of the AEI Housing Center, and also by Arthur Gales, who is the manager of our housing supply initiative at the Housing Center. We'll also be joined by Tobias Peter, who is the co-director also of the AEI Housing Center. But I'll be starting off, and Arthur and I will be switching back and forth, going through the various tools. This is the way the toolkit appears. It's organized into various pieces of the toolkit. This is the supply piece. We have with 6 tools. We have a price toolkit, a component with 9 tools, and we have a migration component with 5 tools. And then there are some other presentations that we have on various topics that relate to the broad topic of housing and economic analysis. And then we have some background material that is also provided. But we will largely be focusing on the 20 tools in the toolkit. And with that, we'll go to the supply component and start with new home construction and as-built density. So one of the questions that we face in thinking about housing and housing supply is how are decisions made about building the size of the home and gross living area, GLA, and the price of the home. And we decided to take a look at across 500 counties. We'll be focusing on Los Angeles here in a moment, but across 500 counties. And we did a very simple analysis. We have 2 scatter plots shown here. The gold colors represent single family detached. The blue represents single family attached. The left scatter plot is gross living area on the y-axis and units per acre or as-built density on the x-axis. On the right scatter plot, it's the x-axis is the same, but now the y-axis has been replaced with an estimate of the current value of the units that are being analyzed in thousands of dollars. And so the We analyzed 67,000 single-family detached units that were built in Los Angeles in this case, from 2000 to mid-2022, and we analyzed a little under 5,000 single-family attached over the same time period. Each of those groups are then divided into deciles. So each dot represents 1/10 of the units that were analyzed, either single-family detached or single-family attached. So one of the common concerns that's raised by both local officials and by not my backyard types is that builders just rape and pillage. If you increase density, they will just figure out a way to make more money and not actually build more affordable housing. We call that more naturally affordable housing. And as I said, we did this analysis for 500 counties. We found that this is broadly applicable across the entire country. Those 500 counties are in 200 metros. And we found a very strong relationship. As you see here, this is not abnormal. This is a relatively normal relationship that we see. And as you can see on the left panel and the right panel on the gold dots, as built density increases, the GLA declines sequentially. And as built density increases, the price declines also sequentially. This is basically because as you increase the density, counted in terms of units per acre, you have less land is required, reducing the cost of the right-hand side and also reducing the square footage. As you increase the density, you can only put a smaller sized units in general on that smaller square footage of a lot as you increase the density. And the combination of a smaller amount of land and a smaller unit leads to a less expensive unit. And we see here in Los Angeles, again on the left panel, the top decile is up around 4,500 square feet, and the 10th decile is down at around 2,400, 2,500 square feet. Huge difference just in gross living area. You see a similar pattern for single-family attached, the blue dots, about 2,500 square feet down to about 1,600 square feet. On the right panel, where we're looking at price versus as-built density, you see it ranges from $1.7 million down to almost $1 million, a little above $1 million. And on the single-family attached side, you see 1.8 million down to about $1.2 million. So one of the things that one can do in terms of increasing housing supply is to increase as-built density. So the vertical line in both cases represents the median for single-family detached in 2019, and that was at 6.2 units per acre. And so if you were to increase that from 6.2 units to something like 9 or 10 units, if you were to increase it to 9 units, you get about 50% more units, and the price of those units would go down from 1.3 million to about 1.15 million. Not the significant, but not huge difference. But the point being, you then get a lot more units. You get 50% more units, and the individuals and households moving into those units will exert downward filtering pressure that is taken advantage of by households that have lower incomes and lower price points, because the people who are moving into the units that are still quite large, in this case about 2,700 square feet, in the case of detached, they're moving out of somewhere else, either owner occupied, they're a move up buyer, or they're moving out of a rental and they're freeing up that rental, and that rental in general is going to and that house is going to cost less or rent for less than the one that they're moving into, thereby freeing up that unit. Think of it as the used car market versus the new car market. When somebody buys a new car, trades in a used car, then that serviceable used car then goes to another household at a much lower price point, but it's still very serviceable. Housing are durable goods and they last for a very long time. So adding more supply is really the key, as we'll see, to addressing our supply problem. Next tool, please. And now Arthur will cover the Walkable Oriented Development tool.
Thank you, Ed. And like with the rest of this presentation, we are going to zoom into Los Angeles City. So I'm just zooming into there, and then we'll give a brief overview of what Walkable Oriented Development is, how it works in our application, and the various benefits it provides as a policy tool. So right now we're looking at the broader Los Angeles metro, and on the map you can see we have these blue polygons intersped throughout the metro area. These are our Walkable Oriented Development boundaries. And to define that, those are areas that are within a 10-minute walk of at least 6 of a set of amenities. And those amenities include grocery stores, restaurants, hardware stores, pharmacies, and supermarkets. And I'll go ahead and enable those specific amenities in the app itself. There we go. Okay. Okay, and you can see those pop up throughout the city, and you can see that our WOD boundaries are set around them. And so this enables us to really clearly zoom in on where residents could live such that they would be within a walking distance to amenities they would go towards every day. And the reason we choose these amenities specifically is because they provide a few benefits. For one thing, restaurants are proxies for other businesses. They tend to cluster around amenities that people travel towards naturally. And then on top of that, the amenities like supermarkets, pharmacies, hardware stores are places that people tend to need to visit on a weekly, monthly basis. And so that covers a lot of what people transition to and from, both directly and indirectly by being near other similar amenities. If we zoom in, we can see that these boundaries are very finely detailed around these amenities. And we think that their location and their topology presents several benefits as a policy tool. First, we think this has a broad range of possible constituents. The presence of these amenities indicates that there are businesses that are nearby who would be very enthused to have greater density, that is, more customers living nearby their boundaries. The fact that they will promote walking by having these amenities close by is of interest to people who are concerned about environmental and health benefits of walkable oriented development. And the fact that they're near amenities that are already built out means that it limits sprawl. So if we take a zoom back out from the metro here, we can see that there are wide areas that are in California, often fire zones, or in other places, suburbs, that aren't covered by our WOD amenities. And so this tends to make sure that if it's used as a guide for where to build additional housing, that this is kept near where people one, visit, but two, work. A lot of these amenities are service sector amenities, and by increasing the supply of housing in these areas, we build housing where people actually need to go to work, and so there's a secondary benefit there. And then finally, the fact that these are clustered around areas that are already built out, that already have sewers built, that already have amenities, and that are already on average denser than the nation on average, indicates to people that a lot of these development, if you're kind of in a suburb somewhere, that this increase in density isn't going to happen in your quote unquote backyard. So that's the basics of walkable oriented development. We have this mapped all throughout the country. Wherever there are amenities, we have a WOD mapped for people to both view, screenshot, print out in any reports.
Arthur, if you want to zoom back out to the nation and people can see, but as you look at LA here, you'll see that virtually all of LA is walkable in terms of this walkable oriented development, which means that all of the parcels within these blue outlined areas are within a 10-minute walk of a defined set of minimum defined set of amenities, which Arthur showed. And so there's a huge opportunity. We're going to talk a lot in this webinar about the advantages of what we call light touch density. Goes by other names like missing middle, gentle density, but we use the term light touch density. And we're going to talk about what the opportunities for both greenfield, we already talked about that in the as-built side. If you increase the density from 6 to 8 or 9 units per acre for single family detached, you'll get 40 to 50% more supply. That's greenfield light touch density, smaller lots, townhouses on somewhat denser also. But we also have what we call infill light touch density, which could be applicable to these WOD areas and outside the WOD areas. In the case of Los Angeles, we've estimated we'll get to this in a minute, but there are 220,000 light touch density infill opportunities over the next 10 years. That's just a portion of what could be done, but that's what our estimate is what would happen over 10 years if light touch density were legalized and the municipalities literally got out of the way and stopped trying to restrict that from happening. What is light touch density? Light touch density basically says if you go back to the kinds of density that we had back in the early 1920s, parts of LA look like this even today. They have duplexes and triplexes and quadruplexes. They have some accessory dwelling units. They have some townhouses, small apartment buildings, cottage courts. There are all kinds of things that smaller lots that qualify as light touch density. As I said, 220,000 units could be built over 10 years in LA from light touch density. But of those, and this is the point about the map we just went over, 130,000 or about 60%, 70% of those units are in walkable oriented development area. That's a very high percentage. Nationally, that percentage is only 20 or 25%. But in LA City, it's about 60%. And so that's a big advantage for LA in terms of promoting walkable oriented development and light touch density. So then, Arthur, this is the map. You can see the whole country's mapped out. You can zoom in anywhere you want. Next, Arthur.
Okay, so right now we're showing the light touch density map, having a little trouble loading the background to it, but you can see here on the polygons that are showing up the areas where we track infill opportunities for light touch density. Here, this is mapped throughout the country, anywhere where we find homes that are available to be converted. And Ed, do you want to go over the LTD methodology briefly?
Yes, or Tobias, you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this is a simple back of the envelope methodology that we have developed, which is mostly based on our findings on what is going on in Seattle, Washington, where we've recently presented our case study at our 12th annual conference. And we've done a deep dive into Seattle, where the city back in the 1990s set aside small pockets, urban villages for light touch density development. And we have analyzed this in great detail. And what we found was that if you allow moderately higher density, the market not only builds more housing, but the housing that is being built as you increase the density becomes lower in price point. And so we have applied the findings from Seattle across the whole country, where we have evaluated every single family detached home that was built before 1980. Why 1980? Well, because you would not necessarily tear down a new structure, but you would start with the older ones. And you would start tearing down these older homes. And if the economics work, you would replace them with either a duplex. Well, first you would start with an ADU, or you would replace it with a duplex, a triplex, quadruplex, or all the way up to an 8-unit townhouse. And of course, this is all driven by the land costs. So we estimate the land costs in the methodology. and the methodology you can, if you're interested, you can also see on there's a view methodology on the left side of the button on the screen that you can eventually pull up. But it starts with the land cost, and if the land cost is high enough, then we're assuming that a developer may come in, and the developer, particularly, then we evaluate the economics of the development, meaning if a developer can make a small profit while reducing housing prices, while housing costs will remain roughly in the neighborhood of the existing structures, then that's a feasibility. We've mapped this out across the whole country, every individual property, and this is here the results as they are aggregated to the census tract level. And Arthur, why don't you pick it up from here?
Well, before Arthur picks it up, we've done a number of case studies. Tobias mentioned Seattle. We've looked pretty deeply in Houston. We've looked deeply in Palisades Park, New Jersey, in Philadelphia, in Charlotte. And we find that the ability to take advantage of light touch density is broadly available. Seattle is a place that's similar to LA in terms of very high home prices, very high construction costs, and high land prices. On the other hand, Houston is a bit at another end of the spectrum. Lower home prices, lower land costs, and lower construction costs. Yet our case study in Houston shows that a huge upsurge in what was largely townhouse development occurred once a simple change was made to their land use code, namely to reduce lot size from 5,500 square feet to maybe 1,500 square feet, and it led to a huge upsurge in new construction in the from about 2000 to the present. Philadelphia presents a bit of a different case. Their land values were very low. They had a huge problem with vacant lots, and they weren't getting any building back in 2000. They put in place a tax abatement ordinance that was very broad throughout the city, and it had no income limits, had no price limits, and it led to a huge increase in construction. Some 75,000 units got built from 2000 to 2020 or so. About half or more of those were townhouses and other light touch density types. The rest were apartment buildings. And so again, you get this, we call unleashing the swarm when you put an appropriate policy in place. We'll see, are doing a lot of work on what we call McMansionization, the flip side of light touch density. And again, both are driven largely by where land prices are and land shares are. But if you don't allow light touch density and you have very high land prices and land shares, you end up with teardowns of basically perfectly good housing, but it's replaced with a much more expensive, much larger unit. You don't get a net increase in units, but if you were to replace that with 4 units, let's say townhouses, you'd end up picking up 3 units, and all of the units would be more in the middle of the market rather than at the tippy top, which is what largely happens with McMansions. But more on that later. Back to you, Arthur.
Thanks, Ed. And just to reemphasize something Ed just said, these are the units that would be economically viable under ideal market conditions, to hint at a question we got. So there can be, and often are, other restrictions based from local or state governments that prevent these units from getting built. In fact, in areas where we don't see these getting built, it is usually due to such restrictions. Los Angeles is one of those areas, and Ed may talk about this later, where we have seen a surge in McMansions being developed in areas where the value of the land would justify greater density, but the given policies on the ground prevent it. And so when you have something like that, developers still build to the highest and best use they're allowed to build to. And in the case of Los Angeles, that is often McMansions and not light touch density development. In contrast, what we're showing here is the opportunity for light touch density that the Los Angeles Metro broadly and the city in particular could take advantage of given its conditions. We have the color code here is by the percentage of the of Los Angeles's given single-family detached stock that could be added over the next 50 years if they were to allow light touch density to take place within their borders. And you can see here we have this mapped both at the census tract around the country, and if we zoom in further, we can see this property by property in any area throughout the country, which is really useful. As Ed mentioned, when we do case studies to ground truth some of these insights, we're able to look property by property and see what the market is doing, which is how Ed's kind of stumbled upon the McMansionization that has been prevalent in areas like Los Angeles, and where light touch density is allowed, we can see it happening live, as we've seen in areas like Palisades Park, New Jersey. And we can hover over each given property for which we have sufficient data, which is most of the single family detached housing stock in the country. And we can see the address, the type of property it is, the number of units that could be added, up to 7 additional units for a given property, given its economic criteria and the space available on the lot. And then, as Tobias mentioned, a key insight here is the land share of the given property, because that allows us to determine what share of the value is present in the land, in the location, versus the structure itself as an entity. And in the map, we can even show, again, looking property by property or by census tract, the actual land share of these given properties, which ranges from 0 to 90 to 100% if it's a vacant lot. And we can see that also colored in at the tract level throughout the city. So this has been very useful to us. One, for ground truthing our own light touch density estimates, but two, as a general guide to where the dynamics of the housing market in a given area can support greater density, whether that be called light touch density or something else, and where it might help to increase the supply of housing while also making that housing naturally affordable.
So, Arthur, if you can bring up Palisades Park, and while you're doing that, this land share issue is very important. Actually, the Housing Center celebrated its 10th anniversary yesterday. We were founded in 2013 in November. But even before that, in 2011, Steve Olner, the co-founder with me of the Housing Center, and I started working on land prices and land shares because we knew there was something important about that. The data were not available. We undertook what was then a study that was literally 1,000 times larger than any prior study that had ever been done. We examined 10 million properties. And in the case of what we found was that during the run-up in the financial crisis, during the aught years, yes, house prices were going up tremendously, but really what was changing was not the structure value, but what was changing was the land value. And that's what was happening. And of course, when the market collapsed, what happened was that the land values went back virtually to where they had started. The structure values were still roughly unchanged, and that's what led to the massive reduction. If you can, I guess it's harder to zoom in here because Palisades, this is, there was an earlier question about what does it take to launch this. So Palisades Park actually doesn't show much opportunity for light touch density, whereas Leonia shows a lot of potential for light touch density. And the reason is that Palisades Park, since 1939, you see the dark green for Leonia, and you see Palisades Park has got, the orange, mostly orange, and some yellow. Palisades Park is already converted to light touch density because in 1939, when they adopted their zoning ordinance, they allowed 2 units or 1 unit on every parcel. Could be a 2-family house, it could be a duplex, whatever, but that was allowed on every parcel, and there were no special rules that applied. If you had a 5,000 square foot parcel, you could build 1 or 2 units on it. Leonia prohibits that. And so Leonia has virtually no duplexes, and Palisades Park is already converted roughly half of the entire borough, which is 1 square mile two duplexes. I stumbled on this when I realized the population of Palisades Park, where I grew up, had grown from 11,000 to 21,000 over this time period of the 90s through roughly the present. And I said, well, it looks kind of the same. It doesn't have any high-rise buildings. It just pretty much looks like the way I remembered it, more or less. And yet it had this huge increase in population. I needed to find out why. And therefore, to answer one of the questions, it just takes what we call a by right change in zoning that actually eliminates a rule that's standing in the way, just going in this case from 1 to 2. Now they started in 1939, but if you were to go from 1 to 2 and have what we call keep it simple, stupid rules, that you don't have poison pills or showstoppers. The town of Richfield Park, which is next door to Palisades Park, you'll see is this green from 60 to 80%. Yes, they allow duplexes pretty much throughout Richfield Park, except that you need twice the land as for single family detached. Well, that defeats the whole purpose of doing a duplex. The whole point of doing a duplex is to cut the land cost roughly in half. We know Seattle made their change that Tobias talked about. We know Houston made the change I referred to. We have seen a case after case after case where a relatively simple, straightforward change, along with the keep it simple, stupid rule, will unleash the swarm. One other question that was asked about the first tool, which was as-built density, was there an inflection point for single family attached at 40 units? That's all local. These are as-built densities, and you see in some cases that last decile might be up at 40. In some cases, that last decile for a county might be at 20. If it's at 20, it certainly could go up higher. If it's at 40, then the question of could it go up higher or not is really more of a local situation. What we found in Philadelphia, much to our surprise, we originally, when we built that as-built density tool, we set a minimum lot size of 1,000 square feet, and it turned out that we were missing virtually half of the new townhouse development on existing lots, vacant lots, in Philadelphia. We found that a sizable portion of the lots had 500 to 1,000 square feet. So in Philadelphia, a 500 square foot lot is 80 units per acre. We had set at 1,000 units, and that kind of limited things to that upper bound of 40. But then we found there are only a few places where it's important, and Philadelphia is certainly one of them. Back to you, Arthur.
Thanks, Ed. Just to conclude on the tool itself, one of the ways you can see the difference here between particularly Palisades Park and Leonia is we map out the year built of these units as well. And you can see both broadly on the tract level and when we look property through property, that there are just a lot more new units that have been built in Palisades Park compared to Leonia, which is, of course, one of the inputs to whether a single-family detached home qualifies for an infill conversion, is it being built before 1980. And in Leonia's case, you can see almost all of its single-family detached housing stock really built either before 1950 or in most cases, or either before 1980 or in most cases before 1950. Anything else on light touch density before we head to, or the map before we head to the estimates?
Ready to go.
Okay. And I'll be brief on the estimates because we've covered most of the conceptual ground over the map. This is a Tableau dashboard that we put together that reflects the content of the map and allows users to view the opportunity for light touch density over a given number of years in a given city, county, or state. And we have this projected out again for a county throughout the nation for which it applies. And then furthermore, we have the more details available on both infill and greenfield LTD estimates, the latter of which I'll come into a moment. For the infill estimates, if we look at details, one of the features we have that we think is useful on this app is the ability to show how many homes you could get if you restricted it to a given density per existing parcel. So that's between 2 and 8 units that are built on an existing single family detached parcel. And that's useful because in real world political debates around relaxing zoning and land use restrictions, the number of homes that are allowed to be built may not be 8 as we estimate in our most optimistic projections. It may be 2, as in California's SB 9. It may be 4 or 6, and as we've seen in recent policy passed in Oregon. And so what this allows people to do is quickly estimate the benefits of light touch density for a given city or county, given a particular restriction of units per parcel. And you can see various, we also allow people to project out for a selected amount of time in advance. So right now I'm showing the 1-year benefit of light touch density and the number of homes that are eligible, but this can also be multiplied across 10 to 50 years, where we expect to see 2% roughly of the units that are eligible converted per year, given ideal market conditions. We also estimate greenfield potential for light touch density estimates, and this is kind of a back of the envelope calculation. Briefly, by greenfield, we mean the building of homes where there previously were none, vacant lots, parks, public lands, etc. And there we simply take the number of units a city or county has built over the past 12 years from 2010 to 2012 and say, look, if you built this, as Ed mentioned earlier, at a density, at an extra 20% of units per acre, you get a lot more homes. In many cases, those homes are still fairly large lots, still single family detached. In Los Angeles, you're going from 6 units to 7.2 units per acre, but over a number of years, that will significantly add to your housing stock. So we could go, right now you're building 587 units per year in Los Angeles. You could add that up to 705 if you increase by 20%. And if you multiply that over, say, 50 years, you get the benefit of 5,000 extra units. And so that's a low-cost way for policymakers to think about the units per acre they allow in new bulk construction in ways that can add to the overall housing supply in the market.
So Arthur mentioned SB 9 and SB 10, which are unique to California, Senate Bill 9 and 10. So Senate Bill 9 generally allows 2 units on a parcel and also allows lot splitting, which if you split a lot, you then get 2 units on each parcel, which allows you to go to 4 units. But you have to have the locality, in effect, get out of the way. And if they don't get out of the way, then nothing much happens. A lot of people ask, well, what happened in Minneapolis? Didn't they do something 3 or 4 years ago? Well, yes, they did do something 3 or 4 years ago. Unfortunately, they left a poison pill in place. And the poison pill was known as floor area ratio. And so they left the floor area ratio, which is the amount of total GLA, gross living area, that you can have on a lot. They left that at basically the same number as if you have a single family detached. Well, of course, if you're going to put multiple units on a parcel, then you're going to need some more floor area to have those multiple units in order to actually make it all the economics work. And if you don't do that, then it's not going to be economically viable. So very little has happened on the duplex front in Minneapolis. We know duplexes will work. Palisades Park didn't have any artificial rules like that, and therefore the duplexes move forward. So that could get you in California, as I said, to 4 units per acre under SB 9. There's a second statute called SB 10, which allows municipalities to do zoning changes of up to 10 units per parcel. And we think this could be used in the WOD, Walkable Oriented Development areas, where you already have mixed use and areas because of that commercial component within that 10-minute walk. and therefore you could have somewhat higher density, the 6 or 7 or 8 units per parcel in a walk-oriented development area. So with that, we will go to the metro supply and demand.
Sure. Just briefly, we also have our ebook written on the subject of California's SB 9 and SB 10 present as background, along with our ebook on light touch density and Ed's model light touch density bill, available as background on the eToolkit.
Thank you. So now we'll go to metro supply and demand. Again, one of the arguments that you hear is, well, if you build more housing, prices will go up. And there have been surveys done. There's actually an article in The Atlantic called "Housing Breaks People's Brains." What did the author mean by that? Simply that if you say to people, well, if you build more cars, what happens? Price goes down. Build more computers, what happens? Build more TVs, what happens? You build more of anything, prices go down. Build more housing, oh, prices go up. Well, housing must break people's brains. And so Tobias, you want to go through this?
Sure. So this is a tool where we look at the relationship between home price appreciation, employment change, and new construction activity. And what we're trying to get across here is the point that for any level of employment change that you have in a metropolitan area, if you build more housing, you have a higher new construction share of sales, you're going to end up with lower home price appreciation than your peers. And on the y-axis, we showed a change in home price appreciation from January 2012 to December 2019. So we're cutting it off before the pandemic. On the x-axis, we're showing the change in employment count from 2012 to 2019. And we're looking at the largest 100 metros. And then we have the coloring indicates the new construction share of sales that ranges from 0 to 40%. 0% in kind of the northeast, Bridgeport, for example, and so forth, versus Austin has fairly high new construction shares. And then we're plotting the whole 100 metros. Here the dot that is highlighted is Los Angeles. And Los Angeles at the time had about a 16% change in employment, which led it to have home price appreciation by about 75%. But you can also see that Los Angeles is colored in red, which means that the new construction share was really low. And if we can hover over the dot for Los Angeles real quick, yeah, so the new construction share was only 8%. However, if you look at New York City, for example, down, which is in this little dot in green, had the same amount of employment change over the had about the same, not New York City, the one to the right next, is it Durham maybe? Yeah, that one here, McAllen. Yeah, let's stick with Durham. Durham, McAllen, as you can see here, they had about the same level of employment change, but their new construction share of sales was 27% or even higher in the case of Durham, and hence the home price appreciation was only 50%. So this to us, you can see the same thing across the whole chart where if you have the green colors are generally for any level of employment change are lower than red colors, which is indicative that if you have higher new construction shares, that helps tamp down home price appreciation. And then the fourth dimension of the chart is the size of the dot, and the size of the dot indicates how much light touch density infill potential you have in the metropolitan areas. And fortunately, not fortunately, the areas that had seen very rapid home price appreciation, those are the areas where you have a lot of infill potential, light touch density infill potential. So those metropolitan areas just need to tweak their zoning and their land use, and they need to make light touch density by right and follow the KISS principle, not put any poison pills in place. And over the next 10, 20, 30 years, they can, through market mechanism, add a lot to the housing stock just by leaning in and allowing the market to convert these older homes that are on large lots with only a single family detached home to light touch density. On the other hand, the places that have seen very rapid home price, very rapid new construction activity, there you can see that the dots are generally smaller. They have a newer housing stock, which you wouldn't necessarily convert to a high-end better use, and hence the dots are smaller. But this also shows that faster home price appreciation, we should not accept faster home price appreciation and housing unaffordability is given. Cities and states certainly have the tools to counteract that. And as we can show clearly here, new construction activity helps on that front. Ed, anything to add?
Thank you, Tobias. I would add that the way I think about it is localities and states that have had policies that have driven up through lack of supply, which is what is going on. Home prices are wearing the ruby slippers like Dorothy going back to Kansas. All they have to do, I know it's not easy, but we know the path. If they change their policies, their land use policies, by right, keep it simple, they will unleash the swarm. We'll talk more about that later, but that's the process. We had a question related to light touch density. What about infrastructure? What about services? We've looked at that to some extent in Palisades Park and some other places. In general, I mean, the number of school-age children in general has been going down tremendously. Households have been getting smaller, and their schools, they had surplus schools. Lots of the areas we're talking about, had schools that they were shutting down. If you look at things like water and sewer, those infrastructure in general are already in place on the street. Yes, you might need a bit more, police. If the population goes up, you might need a bit more fire, but even on the fire hydrants are in place, the fire stations are close by. All of those, you're not adding greenfield, on very large lots miles away from where these amenities are, including infrastructure amenities. So by and large, what we think really offsets that tremendously, and we have this is in the study that Arthur pointed to a couple, the light touch density ebook, etc., is that property taxes per acre go up tremendously because you're increasing the value per acre. We talked about that higher density, but you're not increasing your expenses, your municipal expenses at the same rate, and therefore the property taxes can go down if the locality is a good husband of resources. If they're husbanding their resources, then as Palisades Park did, Palisades Park went from being the middle tax rate in their cohort group of 6 or 7 municipalities around it to the lowest over a span of about 25 or 20 years. And again, when you do this around a commercial area, Walkable Oriented Development, you're also increasing the value of the commercial areas. And in a place like California, both of these can have a salutary effect because of the problems they have with Prop 13 limiting taxation. To keep on schedule, we're now ready to move to the Tool 6, which is new construction, state and county. We'll go through this pretty quickly. You can look up, you can see what the activity is by state. You see California is pretty low. The Northeast is the lowest, but California is pretty dark orange. And if you go to LA, we'll see we have this broken up by both entry level and move up. You can look at it by year. We'll start with 2012 and then show 2022 as the maps are loading. But we've done a lot of work tracking new construction, which sounds like it's something that should be easy. It wasn't easy, but we actually track it down at the property level. We use that data for lots of different things, including this type of work, but we also use it for our light touch density work and for our tracking McMansionization. So if you go to 2012 for Los Angeles, and the left is entry level, and the right is move up, and you see where there wasn't a whole lot of entry level being built in LA back in 2012. You see the move up is on the right. There was a lot more move up density, and density is being shown by the color, how much green you see. That just means there's more individual units, and as those units come together, they create these green areas on the map. If you change to 2022, you'll see that they both go down, but the entry level goes down by a lot. But the move up also goes down. You see a lot of the move up is now in Orange County and just some small areas of Los Angeles. We're now going to move on to the second set of tools, which are price, and we're going to go with house price appreciation and month supply. There's a whole bunch of tools here. We're going to focus on the first one, which is the let's see, house price appreciation year over year. And if you can highlight, let's see, LA. I think you need to go one over. Highlight Metro, yeah, there we go. So did LA get highlighted? Is that it there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so can you hover over on LA? Yeah, there we go. So LA in September had slightly a bit below average. I think for the month of September nationally it was 4.8%. LA is at 4.1%, which given everything that happened with the run up in prices and everything and the run up in interest rates, LA is still experiencing roughly normal house price appreciation. If you go all the way to the left, you'll see Milwaukee, I believe, is on the far left at over 10%. And so we know what's going on is there are places that during the 2011, 12 through 2020, right before the pandemic, went up more slowly than average. Every place was going up for the most part. The Northeast was going up the least. The Midwest was going up sort of a moderate amount, but more average. And then the West and South were going up more, West being including LA. But once the pandemic hit, the Midwest continued to go up, but not as fast as in some of the other areas. But now that the pandemic is over, we're now seeing that Milwaukee, because it was so much more affordable in the period up to 2022, it's now leading the pack because with interest rates at 7.5%, people are saying, well, I can still afford a house in Milwaukee. That demand is, and the supply is very low. That demand is building higher prices. If you go all the way over to the far right, what city is that? Austin, Texas is down 9%. Austin, Texas had a huge run up both during the 2012 through 2019, but particularly during the pandemic. It's really been affected by what we call the California effect of people moving out of California. And so now Austin has had, for this month, has got the strongest year-over-year decline. And that's reflective again of the impact of 7.5% interest rates. If you then switch to house price appreciation year over year, this then shows again, we can go to Los Angeles and get a little bit more into the detail I just went into. You see Los Angeles was going up very rapidly in the early 12, 13, 14, then it slowed off, but still a healthy increase. The overall is green, and you can see it was around 7%, which is still pretty healthy increase. Then it took a big jump up for a while, over 10% if you follow the green line in 2018, 2019. Then there were some changes in the tax law and some other things going on with restricting mortgage amounts that are deductible and state and local taxes. You see prices year over year decline. And not to negative, but almost to zero. And then we have the period that starts with the pandemic. You see the pandemic dip in March, April, May, and then we're off to the races. You see that green line gets up to nearly 20% for LA in late 2021, early 2022. The Fed then, after driving home prices up with zero interest policies and quantitative easing, then starts raising short-term rates, which then flow to long-term rates, and quantitative easing and start quantitative tightening. And we see that house price appreciation plummets. It actually becomes negative in March of 2023. And then as supply tightens, then you start seeing house prices start recovering, just because there's not enough supply. And you have to think of this as, yes, interest rates are higher than they had been, and house prices are high, relatively speaking. However, it's all about supply and demand. And if there are enough buyers who can afford that 7.5% rate and these prices, given the minimal supply, they are going to still bid up these homes. And that's what you see here. Next slide, please, which is house price appreciation cumulative. So this is showing what's happened since beginning of 2012. So this is year over year, or starting in early 2012, and just the cumulative. We set the zero at the beginning of 2012, and just follow each of these price tiers. But again, we'll focus on the green, which marches up, marches up, marches up. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower. We have some of these dips that we saw. But it's important to then note the gold low. You'll see, and this is true in virtually every market we cover. I don't know a market that this isn't true in, where the low end of the market, which is about 30% of the market, it might be a little bit less in a place like LA, but nationally it's about 30%. The low end of the market goes up faster than any of the other price tiers. And that's largely for a couple of reasons. One is that low end of the market has the most leverage available to it through FHA and other government programs. And we see that the low medium ends up coming in second, the red line, and then the others fall back. And the high, which is dark blue, is down near the bottom, or at the bottom. And the second reason is that the supply availability at the low end and the low medium end tend to be in months inventory less than for the other price tiers. It's just so there's just a lot of supply demand issues going on that tend to lead low supply, high demand, high leverage, that tend to lead to higher home prices overall, which is one of the reasons that our recommendation to federal, state, and local governments is that you don't promote demand through things like down payment assistance or through FHA making various changes to its programs, lower premiums and things like that, because that's going to increase demand and does nothing to increase supply. You have to focus on increasing supply, as Tobias went through. Increasing supply will tamp down home prices and will make homes more naturally affordable, as we saw from the as-built density. We're now going to move on to the next tool, which is land share indicators. We've talked about land share, how important it is. This is a map that shows the change from 2012 to 2022. You see in 2012, with the exception of areas around LA and San Francisco and some East Coast areas up in New York, the whole map is pretty much green. And you can see in 2012, the magic point of 60% that Tobias talked about. Only about 4% of all of the units were in zip codes that had land shares above 60% back in 2012. That has increased to over 30% in 2022. And if you shift to LA, you'll see that LA had a lot of orange even back in 2022, except in the northern areas and some of the western, eastern areas. You see on the left, that map on the left, and the orange was both right along the coast and then inland a ways. But now in 2022, LA is virtually all orange and dark orange at that. And you see it went from a little over 20% being over 60% of the units in 2012 to over 95%, 96, 97% in 2022. This is one of the drivers of McMansionization. It also is what makes light touch density economically viable. Again, McMansionization, light touch density are two sides to some extent of the same coin. A builder, if they're legally restricted to single family detached, and if the economics work, they will build a McMansion. If, on the other hand, they are legally allowed to build light touch density and there aren't any poison pills, they will choose light touch density over the McMansion. We have evidence of that in many areas. Next tool, which is the Explaining Metro HPA Over Time. This is a series of charts that we just came out with, some recent research to track what happened in various periods from 1980s all the way through 2022. We're just going to highlight the 2011 to 2020 period and highlight Los Angeles. And you can see that if you hover on Los Angeles, a little further up. Here we go, up a little more. Here we go. You can see that leverage was not a factor. In fact, leverage wasn't a factor anywhere across the country during this time period. This is post-financial crisis. There was a huge drop in leverage. This is well after the financial crisis. This is now 2011. During 2009 through 2011, leverage was taken out of the housing finance market. The federal government pulled back substantially, leaving largely FHA as leverage leader. But by the time we get to 2011, 2012, leverage is basically stabilized, and that's why you see all of the cities are basically the same color around zero, including LA at minus 0.3%. So there's just minimal change in leverage. It's actually declining slightly. Its annualized percentage growth based on Freddie Mac HPA is 7.3%, which you can see is pretty healthy. It's above the national average. You can see that the growth in total wages is 4.6%, which is around the national average, which was about 4.5%. And the annual growth in housing stock is 0.5. And if you hover on national, Arthur, you'll see that national is 0.7. So LA was subpar on its new construction. And so during this period, LA had more rapid house price appreciation than would be expected, which is the trend line, because it had pretty low new construction. We're now going to shift to the next tool, Market Trends Report. And we have a property in LA at 235 East Holden Avenue. You can look up any property in the United States using this tool, and it'll give you a complete report. It takes about 30 seconds for the report to run. But what I'm going to show are two things from this multi-page report. It's about 20 pages. But the two things are the the new construction is a share of all housing stock down to the census tract level. And so you can see how it varies across a metropolitan area such as Los Angeles. And then we're also going to look at new construction across years with the same tool. So there's lots of information here, some of which we've seen similar bits and pieces. We've kind of put it all in one place in terms of one big tool. But if you scroll towards there's new construction to share, and now we get to the map here, which if you zoom out a bit, we will be able to see at a census tract level where the new construction is happening. And you see there's very little new construction in Los Angeles. This is the period of 2012 to 2022. We sort of saw that in the heat maps earlier, but now we're down at a very granular level census tract. And you can look up any census tract that you want. If you continue scrolling down, you'll see some other heat maps like the ones we've already seen, and you'll eventually get to a comparison across years of building. And you'll see here 2012 to 2022 overall entry level and move up for both Los Angeles County and Orange County. Remember, I mentioned that Orange County seemed to have be growing more new construction. You'll see that in 2012, Orange County had 2,200 units built, and in 2022, it had 1,900 units built, a reduction of about 13 or 14%. But LA went from 3,600 to 2,000, which is a reduction of about 45%. So that's again telling us that LA is really lagging on new construction. Spoiler alert, in terms of single family detached new construction that occurs in LA, more than well over half of it, about 65% of it, are tear downs that are replaced by McMansions. So they're not actually adding any units. So whatever's being built, it's worse than you think when you have that higher percentage of tear downs, because it's not adding a unit, it's taking away a sort of average priced unit, give or take, and replacing it with a very expensive unit. If the average unit that's being torn down might be $1 million, which is kind of average for LA, you're replacing it with a $2.5 million unit. And that is accounting for a significant component of new construction in LA. Moving on to the next tool, state and county indicators. This is a map. You just highlight LA, please. You can see this is house price appreciation since 2012. You can see where LA, shows up. A lot of the country is blue. A lot of these are rural areas. They have much lower house price appreciation. If you highlight LA, you'll see the darker reds and oranges are out west and in Florida. And then there's some areas around, this looks like Nashville and Atlanta. You see a bit in Texas, up in the Northwest. But you get a feel for where the house price appreciation is the strongest. The next tool, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, is the first time buyer tool. And you can see, if you highlight Los Angeles, you'll see Los Angeles out of 60 metros is number 58 in 2022 in terms of affordability for first time buyers. I think the only place, I think San Diego might be worse if you can hover, which I forget which one's number 60, but might be, there's 59 and Salt Lake is number 60. And so this basically, we track this, you can go back in time, but in the interest of time, we'll just focus on this. You can see that first time buyers have a lot easier chance east of the Rockies, except in some pockets in the Northeast. And again, Nashville has gotten quite a bit worse. but the most expensive places tend to be Colorado and further west, the one exception being Tucson. And we'll be updating this once we get 2023 data. Moving on to the next tool, which is information out of what's called the American Community Survey, the 5-year survey. And we look at, this is for California, this is state by state, and it shows us what homeownership rates are by different types of property, which gets to another issue. If you want to promote homeownership, you can't do that easily building large structures. You see the homeownership rate for structures with 20 or more units, literally it's pretty close to zero, particularly in the more recent time periods. It's just a few percent. And that continues all the way, even the 2 to 4s have more, but compared to single family attached and detached, there's no comparison. So again, we've done a lot of work on Seattle and other places. If you want to promote homeownership and wealth building through homeownership, then you need to have light touch density that smaller SFD on smaller lots, and townhouses built more densely in terms of the as-built density, and that's going to allow you to increase the homeownership rate, or at least stop it from declining or slow its decline. Contract rents are shown next, and then below that, I think, are median property value. So lots of information here at the state level. We'll now go to another tool, Tech Worker Index. This is one that focuses on, sort of the higher end of the market. These are the tech workers around the country. Obviously, California, Silicon Valley, big tech worker area. And however, you can see we have this little metric that shows how much house you can afford by color and how much of the house is filled in. Green means you can afford half of the houses or more. And those are the light green to dark green. And you see most of the country is light green to dark green. But when you get to Colorado and West, with a few exceptions, you're looking at reds and yellows and oranges. And if you hover on LA, you'll see that LA, only 14% of tech workers can afford all the homes in LA. They can afford a house of $528,000, and LA is 96 out of the 100 largest metros. So it's one of the least affordable tech worker metros. Let me see if we have any questions. Looks like we have one more. How can we access heat? Arthur, do you want to go through that?
Sure, and I'll put a link in the Q&A to answer that question.
And the easiest way is just type in AEI Housing Center heat in Google or whatever search engine you're using, and it'll take you there. It's going to be harder to find from the AEI site. We have our own website, and then we have these toolkits that are separate from our own website, but you can get to all of this from our Housing Center website. And question, somebody from North Dakota, can the last couple of slides on largest metros be created for smaller areas? So what, let's see, that was, is that the tech worker? I'm thinking it might be the, let's see, tech worker index. So what we probably could do, just send us an email. I know we've done this before for North Dakota, and with what you're looking for, and we'll see what we can create. We had to limit to the top 100 just to, whatever, but there are no, North Dakota doesn't have any cities in the top 100, but we probably have some state level information that we might be able to compare to the rest of the country, if that's what you're interested in, tech worker. We're going to get to the Carpenter Index next, which is another variant of, so we talked about the tech worker, we're now going to talk about the carpenter index. So carpenter index similar to the tech worker, but now we're talking about the lower part of the market, basically entry level part of the market. And our question is, can carpenters afford to buy the homes they build? And the answer is yes, in the Midwest generally. Again, this covers 2022. We use the same methodology in terms of the graphics, but you see now that Los Angeles, I think, is down near zero. The house is completely blank, and so if you hover on Los Angeles, you'll see that Los Angeles is 100 out of 100. It's the worst metro for carpenters in the country. This takes into account the price of houses and the earnings of carpenters locally in that metro. So we're combining both of those, and we then create a household purchasing power based on multiplying the carpenter's income by 1.5, which is roughly what the Census Bureau says on average, and that gives us the buying power, and then we have the price of the homes. And again, it's what percent of entry-level homes can be purchased by a carpenter. The sad story is that only 4.4%, a carpenter household can only afford 4.4% of entry-level homes, $304,000. And there are virtually no homes that sell for that in LA County. If you go to a place like Pittsburgh, you'll see a very different result. Just hover on Pittsburgh. Yeah, there we go. And you'll see Pittsburgh is tied for 100 out of 100 as the best. Because the carpenter can afford 100% of entry-level homes. And if you just do one other thing, Arthur, you take, if you go back to turn off Pittsburgh and keep in mind's eye what this looks like, and now go back to 2012. Things were much more affordable in 2012. There was less affordability on the West Coast, even back then, hover on LA. But back in 2012, a carpenter could have afforded 38% of homes. And I think the number from before was 3 or 4%. So you can see how much worse it's gotten for carpenters. We need more supply. We're now going to shift to the next group of tools. And let me check, I think we had one more question. Oh. Okay, I think we're good. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to shift to the next grouping, which we call group under migration. There are 5 tools here. We're going to start with a map on construction and jobs and new construction growth, and we're going to focus in on LA. And we're going to look at changing jobs from 2004 to 2019. So this is showing us where the growth in jobs are and where the decline in jobs are in the LA area. And of course, you see this vast increase in jobs, but there's virtually no increase in housing. I think we actually have, if you go up to the menu for I think we have one for new construction units there, and you'll see that there aren't any units being built hardly. Yet there was all this job growth. And the one thing our research has demonstrated, if you add jobs, you have to add housing units. If you don't add housing units, you will get massive house price appreciation. You have to be adding jobs along the way. And the South part of the country is going to be facing this problem. There's massive amounts of economic development going on. Hyundai is building a plant, a battery plant, and an EV plant in Savannah, Georgia, outside Savannah, Georgia, 8,000 employees. Where are those people going to live? You have to start figuring out, how am I going to get the housing to go along with the jobs? If you don't have the housing going on along with the jobs, you will get that result that Tobias went through with the three lines, the red line, the orange line, the green line. You'll be up at that red line. So moving along, now we're going to shift to the next tool, which is a table of jobs and estimated wages by industry. This is really interesting because if you look at the change in jobs and the estimated wage in 2019, the average wage is about 63,000. So just let's go down. The first one is accommodation. It grew by 56,000 jobs. That was a big category. It has wages that are just barely half of the total average wage. So you're adding lots of low-paying jobs. You look at the next category, administrative support, 17,000 jobs. Just a bit more, 43,000, but still well below average. You're looking at arts and entertainment, 20,000 jobs, still below average. You're looking at construction at 10,000 jobs, still below average. You're looking at educational services, 58,000 jobs, still below average. You actually lost jobs in finance and insurance in LA, and those were 83,000, well above average. Healthcare, you added the most jobs in healthcare, 175,000 jobs, but those were also well below average, 51,000 versus 61. Well, people say, well, how can that be? Well, you have to think of healthcare is really three separate businesses. Business one is the medical part of healthcare. And so you have the doctors, you have the nurses, you have a lot of practical nurses and other assistants in that. And so, yes, the doctors, the nurses, the administrators get paid a lot, but you have a lot of other people that also are part of that healthcare part. But there are two other parts of the hospital. They're running food service, and that has a lot of low-paying jobs. And they're running a hotel. All of those rooms, all the laundry, all the cleaning, all of that goes on is really like running a hotel within the hospital. And those are all low-paying jobs. And so, by and large, healthcare jobs are relatively low-paying when you put it all together. And that was the big growth area for LA. Information was a growth area, plus 26, and those are very high-paying jobs. But the plus 26 is not a huge number that was added. Management jobs was slight negative. Those are, you know, the highest paying jobs. And then you have manufacturing, big decline, 62,000. Very, you know, well-paying jobs, 88,000 versus 63,000. So that was a big negative. Going down, real estate added 8,000 jobs, but only pays $22,000. That's way, I think that's the lowest number on here. California has a huge number of real estate agents for its population. And retail, another one, it grew a little bit, but again, low-paying jobs. Transportation warehousing grew a fair amount, 22,000 jobs, but again, relatively low-paying. And then wholesale decline, and those are high-paying jobs. So the overall picture here is really a tale of two counties. There's the part of the county that was growing in jobs, but they were generally low-paying jobs. And then you have the high-paying jobs that either were growing modestly or actually declining. And it becomes a barbell, which again exacerbates the housing problem and the rent problem, because you have a lot of well-to-do people, but then you have this group that are in the accommodation food services and the healthcare and, you know, some of these other areas that there are lots and lots of jobs, but they're pretty low paying. The next slide is going to be the next tool, which is we call the arbitrage index.
And we do have a couple questions on the previous slide.
Okay. Let's see. Is there data that reflects the gig economy as part of industry? I think we do have what we call the way the data are reported is information, professional technical services and information services. That's how the federal government in the these job tracking categories, track it. There are some other tools here that have some pie charts that show, if you go to pie chart, this shows for San Diego, California, what the different job percentages are and how San Diego stacks up against that. So we're limited basically in terms of how the federal government tracks these job data. So if we then can go to the arbitrage index. So this is one of my favorite indices, and we can go to LA and show what's going on there. So this is a very simple, it was difficult to put together, it's a simple concept. We are tracking people who are moving up from a home that they own and selling that home and buying another home. And we're tracking what's the home they sold, what's the square footage, what's the lot size, what's the this, what's their, different metrics about the home they sold. And then we have the same metrics for the home they bought, year built, all of these metrics. And we do this through a combination of analyzing public record data and post office move data. We have no information on renters because renters don't leave a footprint in terms, they're not part of public records because they don't own anything. It's a lease and leases aren't recorded. And so when a renter moves, we don't have any information to start with. And the post office won't start with the person who's moving. You have to give them an address. And so the only addresses we have are the people that own a home, sell it, and move somewhere else. But we have lots of those people that we track, and we track it nationally, and we track it to and from metro areas, CBSAs. In this case, we're tracking it as an origin metro of LA, and we're looking at where people are moving. First of all, most of the people stay within LA County. You'll see that 55% were within LA County. And of course, they're move-up buyers, so they're going to be buying a more expensive house. That's what move-up buyers do when they move within the same county. And so you'll see the movers within LA County, they bought a house that was 26% more expensive than the one they sold, and they got about 31% more square footage. So the price per square foot actually went down a little bit, but they were buying a bigger house, but they got more square footage, much more square footage. Those are the ones moving intra LA County. The next big county is Riverside. Riverside, which is right next to LA, but much less expensive. The people moving to Riverside bought a house for 78 cents on the dollar, but they got 182% or 82% more space. So they ended up on a per square foot basis paying 43 cents on the dollar. That's what we call the arbitrage opportunity. They were arbitraging the price difference per square foot between LA and San Francisco. If we were to look at San Francisco, San Jose, we'd find that you can move anywhere in the United States and arbitrage to a lower price per square foot, bar none, because San Francisco, San Jose is the most expensive in the country. LA is not too far behind. So if we then look out of state, we'll see that the big destination is Phoenix. And Phoenix, there was about 2.7%. The people, Riverside was 9% of the people were moving to Riverside, but 2.7 are moving to Phoenix. So the ones moving out of state, Phoenix is the first destination. Largest destination, and again there you're getting at 46 cents per square foot. Even Austin, you're at 42 cents per square foot, and so Boise, you're at 36 cents per square foot. So now you're seeing why, in part, why people are moving from LA to other areas of the state, other areas of LA County. Within LA County, but in particular moving out of LA County within the state of California and outside the state of California. The other thing that you can tell here is they're largely moving to places that are out west. They're not moving, you don't see New York or Miami or other places on here. There are some people that move there, but you can see the smallest percentage is what, 0.8%. The rest are all smaller than that. I guess Nashville is the one exception at 0.9%. That's east of the Mississippi. So that's interesting. The next use of this tool is to go to time trends, and we say what's been going on if we go, again, Los Angeles, and then focus on, say, Riverside, San Bernardino, which was the biggest place outside of LA County at that 8 or 9% of the moves. And we're going to see that when you move from LA to Riverside, that 43 or 44%, which is the first column, you're going to see as you scroll down that price per square foot has been around 42, 43 cents per square foot pretty much the entire time. It hasn't changed much. Well, how can that be? Well, LA County is going up in price in general. Riverside's going up in price. Even if Riverside's going up a bit faster, LA County is working off a very high base compared to Riverside. And so even a place like San Francisco could be going up at a couple of percent, and Boise could be going up at 10%. It takes a very long time for those to become equal. Obviously, they're very far from becoming equal, but you can see these numbers don't change much, even though they're over a period of 3 or 4 years. You also see that the price per square foot within the moves intra LA County are down in the 95-cent range also. We're now going to move on to the next tool, which is another migration tool. And that's going to be the IRS migration map. So a bit about IRS migration. This is a very useful tool. It goes back to 1990 or so. The IRS publishes information on anonymous information on taxpayers aggregated up at a geographic level, and it basically says how many exemptions, they're counting exemptions, both the taxpayer, if there's 1 or 2 taxpayers, and any exemptions in addition to the taxpayers, how many exemptions were filed, and where were those exemptions filed in, say, 2019 versus 2020? Did those exemptions move from LA County to someplace else? And if they did, where, and vice versa? Did exemptions move from someplace else to LA County? And so they're tracking net outflow and net inflow of these moves. And they also track income and things like that. So we see for LA that mostly it's outflow, and the outflow is way down at the bottom. And you see San Bernardino, which we've already seen from the move-up buyers, is the biggest. Riverside and San Bernardino. Now we're looking at counties, and so Riverside and San Bernardino are each a county, and we see those are both at the bottom of the list, which makes them the highest amount of inflow. From negative outflow from LA becomes inflow into Riverside, San Bernardino. We see Orange County. Clark is Las Vegas. Ventura, Kern County, I think it's in California. Maricopa is Phoenix. San Diego. Traverse is Austin, etc. If you go back up to the top, King is Seattle. If you go back up to the top, you'll see San Francisco has got more people moving to LA than LA people moving to San Francisco. Kings is New York County. New York is New York Manhattan County, or New York County Manhattan Borough. Cook County is Chicago. So you get the idea. You see what it is. And if you that big green line that's going up across Canada is landing in New York, is the one that we just see here, Kings County and New York County. So this is very useful. There's lots more information on this tool. We're going to go to the net outflow by year as the next tool. And we can look at California. And we see that California has had negative net outflow every year since 1990. It accelerated tremendously in the early 90s. There was a lot of economic things going on. Economic unemployment was going up. House prices were going down. Things were going on in California in the early 90s. And you see a big increase in out-migration that reverses, never gets to be positive. Then it increases again towards the end of the run-up in the lead up to the financial crisis. And then we've had pretty much a continuous, since 2010, 2011, a continuous decline in out-migration. And we see that it's now over 300,000 in 2020. So now we're going to go to a couple extra slides, if you can pull those up. So that's the end of the toolkit. We have some other slides that we haven't incorporated, but we think are useful. If you have interest in them, we can just email us. But if you can bring up that document that I sent. So much of Los Angeles housing stock was built before 1970, even 1960. Excuse me, even 1950. And that means that, again, that's another input that says light touch density, McMansionization are both very economically viable in Los Angeles. It takes older stock. Los Angeles has very old stock. It helps if it's smaller stock, and LA has smaller stock. The stock that was built older tends to be smaller. LA has very high home prices, but it has very high land shares, as we saw, and then it has high construction costs. Those are the things that tend to, particularly the first three, promote either McMansionization or promote the conversion, infill conversion on light touch density. So you can see all this blue. There's a little bit of the lighter green, which is 1950 to 1970, but all that blue is pre-1950. There just hasn't been much construction in California since 1970, in LA City since 1970. The next slide, and we provide a link on here as way of background, is the housingdata.app. This is, you can pick state, metro, county, city. This is very convenient. This individual has put together this application which tracks housing permit data from the Census Bureau. There's some information from for California cities that comes from the Housing and Community Development Department in California on ADUs. But in general, it's from Census Bureau and goes back to 1980 and shows you at the city level. You can look at the county level. This is the city, what the number of permits issued and what type of permits they're issued. And you can see there were huge amounts of permits issued in the 80s, parts of the 80s, then that declines tremendously. Then it increases, but not as high during the run up to the financial crisis. Then it plummets again and then starts building back. And you can see the introduction of ADUs is a significant component of the new construction or the permits in LA. But you can see that the one unit, which is the dark blue, which we saw in some of the other data, are pretty small. And as I said, a significant chunk of that dark blue are really teardowns of existing structures and replacement by a McMansion. We're now going to shift to a topic we've touched on number of times, which is McMansionization. And so we've looked at this city by city, we've identified property by property, and what we have found is that about 8,000 single-family detached units that we can track were built since 2012. About 35% of those, 5,000 were tear down McMansions, and so 60% roughly tear down McMansions, and therefore there's a very high risk among the remaining SFDs, a portion of the remaining SFDs to convert to McMansionization, and so Los Angeles could lose a substantial chunk of its existing supply. That supply, as I said, is currently, it's high priced, but it's much lower priced than what gets built or takes place. Now, Houston also has a fair amount of McMansionization going on. It has more McMansions built than Los Angeles. However, Houston built 42,000 single family detached since 2012, versus Los Angeles built 8,000. Again, if they built 8,000 and 5,000 were McMansions, that's really only 3,000 extra units. Houston built 42,000, of which a little over 5,000. It had 37,000 extra units. So you can see Houston is building a lot more net new units, just as single family detached, than Los Angeles. Plus, Houston also had all those other units that got built that we alluded to earlier under some changes to their land use laws go back to 2000. So we have other cities. We haven't put this on the toolkit yet, but we wanted to show that. The last two slides we want to show are a comparison of Houston and Los Angeles. Housing abundance is the key to reducing displacement. We will have our Good Neighbor Index webinar starting at 1 o'clock, but as a sneak peek, we want to compare and contrast Houston and Los Angeles. Houston, very large, urban area. Los Angeles, very large urban area. These numbers, you can see here, the x-axis is what we call displacement pressure, or it's the median price to median total income ratio. And in Houston, those numbers have ranged in 2012 from 2.8 to today about 3.7, 3.8. LA, on the other hand, back in 2012 was at 7.3, and today it's near 10. And so, whereas Houston has gone up marginally, significantly, but marginally at the low end, LA was already high and has gone up much higher. And when we look, that's the x-axis, we look at the y-axis, that is the displacement rate. We take the point in time count, divide it, calculate per thousand population, and we now have a displacement rate. The displacement rate in Houston started out low, and they had a low displacement pressure. And their displacement rate was just a little above 1, about 1.2, 1.3 in 2012. It's come down pretty steadily, including through the pandemic, and it's now down at about 0.6 or 0.7. And it declined further in terms of the absolute number in 2023. LA, contrast that with LA, which started out with very high displacement pressure and high displacement rates, and they just kept going higher and higher and higher. We estimate that 60 to 75% of the increase in LA's displacement rate was due to the increase of its displacement pressure, namely house prices relative to income went up, so fast. That was what was causing 60 to 75% of the increase in homeless. And LA's displacement rate in 2022 was 14 times LA's rate in 2022, up from 2.7 times in 2012. We know that Houston has a very effective regional response program to homelessness known as the Way Home. and that's credited with housing over 28,000 individuals and families, with a 90% still being housed to this date, and a reduction in homelessness that was significant. LA's doubled over that time period, while Houston's went down by 50%. The next slide, extra slide, is what the wage is by occupation and how that relates to rents. And you can see LA on the far left, and only exceeded by San Francisco, which has a higher peak. The yellow line is the median annual rent, which is on the right axis. So it's about $24,000 in LA. It's about $27,000 in San Francisco. But then we have the different types of jobs. And recall those wages that we talked about earlier, and that food service, food prep, and healthcare support occupations, and some of these others were relatively low paying jobs. And so you see food prep is that green, the healthcare is that yellow. Those are up at the 50–60% of their wages would have to go to rent in order to rent a 1-bedroom apartment. And you can see that with the exception of San Francisco, these lines tend to trend down, but you also have some places. So Riverside, San Bernardino is in a much better position than LA, but you also see some places. Napa is pretty high. I think San Diego was relatively high. One last conclusion. Where will our children and grandchildren live? That's what I like to use to frame what we're talking about here. And a city, a county, a state, we believe can achieve housing abundance. It may require different strategies and tactics in different places, rural versus urban versus suburban, high cost versus lower cost. In some places it's going to be ADUs, in some places it might be modular housing, in some places it might be the light touch density infill, in other places it might be light touch density greenfield. The point is you have to understand what the potential is for each of these. So we try to do that here for LA. LA's been building at about 20,000 a year in terms of single family and multifamily homes. So over 10 years, that would be 200,000. The Regional Housing Needs Assessment of the state of California says LA County needs 457,000, with yielding a shortfall of about 257,000. So we then go through and say, well, what could we do with light touch density? Well, first recommendation is end exclusionary zoning by legalizing light touch density infill. That's 220,000 homes over 10 years. You get another 15,000 homes. That's for the entire county. Whatever the percentage would be for LA City. The reason that number is relatively low is because LA City and LA County don't build much. Therefore, if you increase the density of not building much, you don't get a whole lot. You're really going to get the big kick in with the infill light touch density. The WOD I mentioned earlier would be a large portion of this. That's already 130,000 of that 220,000. And then you could do ADUs. Now you might ask, well, wait a minute, aren't more than 10,000 ADUs or more than 1,000 ADUs are being built already? Well, that's because we think if there were the KISS rule applied to legalizing light touch density, 2, 3, 4 units per parcel, then people wouldn't be building all of the ADUs they're building. They're taking the path of least resistance. A lot easier to build ADUs and a lot fewer restrictions in building ADUs than there are in doing infill 2, 3, and 4 units. So again, if the market were left to its own devices, we think it would shift to going to the infill rather than the ADUs, but we still estimate there would be 10,000 ADUs built. The total of all that's 245,000. Which would eliminate 95% of that shortfall. Again, City of Los Angeles and other cities, they're wearing their ruby slippers. We have a series of other things that parking requirements, light touch processing, light touch permitting. What's ever allowable for single family detached should be allowable for LTV. LTD. You don't require single family detached to be owner occupied. Why would you require a place with an ADU or with a duplex to be owner occupied? Allow easy lot splitting. That's a way that you can do it. California has a problem with condominiums, given all the litigation. It's hard to do a condominium in a lot of places. The Charlotte and Palisades Park being two examples we found. They don't do lot splitting. They just build as a condominium, a 2-unit condominium, and it's very low bureaucracy and paperwork, very low expense, and they don't have to split the lots. That's what they did in Palisades Park. Tailor height setbacks, building floor area ratios, other restrictions. I alluded to floor area ratios, and many other things, including I mentioned Philadelphia, and all of this then unleashes the swarm. The little graphic is what light touch density looks like. KISS is the keep it simple stupid, and that unleashes a swarm, which was a term popularized by strong towns. We've got a bit of time for questions. I think we've taken, let's see. Healthcare, okay, hold on. It seems that, okay. Healthcare, does this include home health services? Does anybody know, Tobias, do you know the answer to that?
Unfortunately, I don't.
Okay. Yes. Arthur?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Not sure where that fits in. We'll have to find out. And what percent of out-of-state relocated persons are due to military moves? We don't have any information there. I would just say that military, the big areas for military are Virginia, around Norfolk and the whole complex around there. And San Diego is another high military area. There are bases all over the country, obviously, but we don't know the answer because that's not a data element that we have information on. Next question, please explain how migration measures can be used to study areas other than LA County. And would my community need to commission a set custom study? So Arthur, maybe you can go through and just pick someplace else. I know, let's see, I didn't bring the list. Maybe if the person could give us the area that she's from, if you can type that in the question.
While we're waiting for that, I'll just note that most of these tools generalize across the nation in some shape or form. And as a preview, our Good Neighbors Index does have a pre-made report that you can print out for pretty much any continuum of care. That's a super county group across the country. Those you can print out in advance, but most or all of these tools you can find in some more local region. In some local region, if Los Angeles isn't your particular destination, that's just the example we've chosen.
So yeah, it with the exception of some of the things like the tech index and the carpenter index and first time buyer, we had to limit those to the top 60 or whatever, 100, whatever it was, metros. But as Arthur said, for these maps like this, we've got the whole country pretty much, you know, as long as the IRS is publishing something. And somebody's asked about Wyoming. So for example, I was just at a conference a couple weeks ago. The governor of Montana spoke. Montana passed a whole a bunch of what I would call light touch density bills, including legalizing duplexes in the larger cities of Montana, which again, the larger cities of Montana are not large by comparison to an LA, but for Montana, they're the largest cities. Why did Montana do this? Montana undertook this whole package, pretty substantial package, because according to a lot of the testimony, a lot of discussion, they didn't want to have happened to Montana what's happening to California. Well, you say, wait a minute, how could that happen to Montana? Well, Montana, as we show this afternoon, Montana has, relative to its income, has high home prices. My recollection is the ratio in Montana is about 5.5 to 1, median house price to median income. That's above the national average. So Montana already has this house price pressure is growing. It's growing in part because of that outmigration from California. Again, given Montana's population, you don't have to have a lot of people move from California to Montana to have a big effect. That's what happened to Boise. So what else did the governor talk about? He talked about making the changes, I think ADUs, making the changes on duplexes. They made a bunch of other changes, but they also addressed the issue of rural areas. The problem is we have areas that haven't built a house in 50 years in these areas. There has been no demand. These have been population declining areas. But he said, we keep track of people who've left Montana and we email them 4 times a year and say, don't you want to come back home? And a lot of times, many times, they do want to come back home, and they want to come back home to where they were. So they realized they needed to get housing in some of these rural areas. And they said, well, we don't have the worker infrastructure in those areas. And for carpenters, we can't build stick built because there hasn't been a stick built house built in decades. So they recruited a modular housing factory to move to Montana, number one. And then they said, well, we do have electricians and we do have masonry people and we do have plumbers, because those are things that you just need to do, keep existing housing going and whatever other structures you have. So we do have a cadre of those. We're going to do some things on our junior college and trade workforce training and things like that. But if we could get the modular to start putting it on site and having the masonry and the plumbing and the electrical for that, we do have some people for that. And therefore, that was the solution that they came up with to deal with what they viewed as their unique problem. And so I think, again, you have to look at this locally and say, what are the tools in my toolkit? We're trying to provide lots of information that allows you to evaluate that and measure that. But you can, if you're work from home is certainly a big change that has occurred as a result of the pandemic. And the percentage of people working from home, the number pre-pandemic was something like 7 or 8% of the days were worked from home. And now we're up to, I think, 30%, something like that. And it went up to 60% or whatever the number was, 55%, and it came back to 30. The important thing is not that it went from 60 to 30. The important thing is it went from 5 or 6 to 30. And that was a sea change, and that sea change hasn't particularly been changing the last year or so. And in my opinion, is likely not to change. So the opportunity to move to lower priced areas, we do have the information on migration, down with smaller areas. It's just, we've got all of these places showing here, but we do have all that data. Likewise with the out-migration from the move-up buyers we have, where all those move-up buyers move to, including down to the rural areas they might have moved to. So I hope that's helpful. Let me just check and see if there are any other questions before we adjourn. It's like I've been trying to use the tool on my iPad, often doesn't work. Optimized for mobile devices. Okay, can we'll make a note of that. Arthur, you have a note of that?
Yes.
And I think we are at noon hour and we are out of questions. So we will adjourn for 1 hour and then come back. And Major Frizzell will go through the Good Neighbor homeless toolkit, homeless displacement toolkit. Look forward to seeing you on the other side of the break. Thank you very much.